We're in Plains, Georgia. You remember Jimmy Carter? This is the high school where Jimmy and his wife, Rosalind, I believe it is, both graduated from high school. This is the whole school. It's just one building. This is Miss Julia's classroom, his most influential teacher. This is the train depot in Plains, Georgia. It was the president's campaign headquarters for his campaign. This is Jimmy's boyhood home. He lived in it from the time he was born until the time he graduated and went to Annapolis. This is Jimmy's bedroom. None of the furnishings belong to the family, but this is his room. It's in the back of the home. And the living room. Dining room. Getting indoor water was quite an improvement for them back then. Wood-burning stove. Until they had running water, they had to use the well. The family also ran a commissary on their farm, which is in effect a convenience store. The local people from around here could walk to this store and purchase what they needed immediately, usually on credit, tobacco, that sort of thing. But they would also sell shoes or a shirt. It was only open on Saturdays, but they would open it up anytime you came by to make a purchase. You just had to find the guy who owned it or a member of his family. Jimmy would come in and make a sale, 5 cents worth of tobacco, and go back out into the field. Yep, they had gasoline too, 7 cents a gallon. This windmill, purchased for $25 from a Sears catalog, was what gave them running water. The water was pumped up from a deep well into that tank, which then created the water pressure they needed to run the sink, the commode, and a cold shower. They had their own blacksmith building where Jimmy would repair the smaller tools. Dad would do the heavier jobs. And of course a barn, various outbuildings, sheds, storage buildings. They used mules here then, no tractors, and hand plows. And Daddy would ring the bell every morning at 4:30 a.m., an hour before daylight, to wake them all up. The help would live nearby. And an outhouse, of course, although I doubt if this is the original one. At the end of this street is the Carter compound. He's within the city limits of Plains. And this, I guess you'd say, was the public entrance. I'm sure invited guests can come in through there. They have a little walk-up area here where you can kind of walk a little ways into the compound, but there's no parking provided. You can go about a block away to a church and park, I was told. No stopping, keep moving. We're at the National Prisoner of War Museum near Andersonville, Georgia. It's the site of the infamous Confederate prison where tens of thousands of Union soldiers died, mostly of starvation and disease. Reconstruction of the North Gate.
But, hard to tell these days. The markers that are closest to the deadline, and you'll notice there are some right smack on the deadline, or perhaps more likely tunnels. And the tunneling, it's one of those things that it's hard to nail down the reality versus the mythology of the place. 45,000 prisoners. Just over 300 are documented successful escapes. Of that number, only a single successful escape is attributed to tunneling. And tunneling happened all the time, but looking, short of just starting to dig up the whole place, it's hard to distinguish what's a tunnel and what was a well. Here at the northwest corner is the second of the two portions of the stockade that we've reconstructed. This represents the expansion in June of 1864, and a little less care was taken on these logs. They just put round logs into the ground. They didn't square cut them, rough hewn them like the earlier construction had been done. And before us is a representative sample, minus the soldiers, of course, of the shelters, the shebangs that prisoners were residing in and making the best of their situation.
The tents or shelters are called shebangs. The site of the prison goes not all the way to the far tree line, but almost. There's a huge complex, 26 acres, if I remember correctly. There's a stream running down in the slope ahead of us, but it was inadequate, and wells were dug. But even then, sanitation was a part of the problem, and part of the problem for the disease. This is a prisoner of war memorial. Once again, it's dedicated to all prisoners of wars, not just those here at Andersonville. This is the cemetery immediately adjacent to the Andersonville prisoner of war camp. And some days over 100 men would die. There's 13,000 of them buried here, shoulder to shoulder in trench graves, no caskets. What the Union Army didn't tell the public is that at a POW camp in Chicago during the war, there was an equal number of men who died, Confederate soldiers. There was no one held to blame for that, unlike the Confederate captain who was hung in Washington, D.C. He was in charge of the inner part of the camp. We're in Fort Valley, Georgia. Did you ever wonder where those Blue Bird buses came from? Well, this is it. If you want a school bus, here's the place to get it. Every schoolboy's nightmare. This is a fighter aircraft, the F-15. A modeler's paradise. A century of flight. The Blackbird. Remember when it was ultra secret? Boy, do they have airplanes here. The B-29, a super fortress. That's a casing for the first mass-produced atomic bomb that the U.S. made. The B-1 bomber, officially named the Lancer, but often called the Bone, B-O-N-E. British bomber. It's the B-52. When this took off at the Air Force Base where I was stationed, if you were watching TV, you might as well go to the restroom, because literally, by the clock, for 5 minutes, you weren't going to be able to hear anything. You weren't deafened, you just couldn't hear the TV. We are now in Macon, Georgia. All of these products are attributed to having been invented or improved and patents issued to black inventors.